It was supposed to be a celebration of love, our 10th wedding anniversary, a night filled with music, laughter, and the glow of chandeliers reflecting off crystal glasses. The hall was filled with 150 guests. Friends, family, people who had seen David and me build our life together from the ground up. I remember standing there in my pale silver gown, smiling as waiters moved between the tables carrying trays of champagne. The band was playing our song, Can't Help Falling in Love, and for a moment, I almost believed in the fairy tale again. Almost. David stood a few feet away, laughing nervously as my younger sister, Maya, adjusted the microphone on stage. She had been my maid of honor 10 years ago, and now, as she took the mic again, she looked radiant in a red dress that clung to her like confidence itself. Everyone adored Maya. Her energy, her jokes, her way of making any room revolve around her. "Before we toast," she said, flashing that familiar smile, "I just want to remind everyone that behind every successful marriage, there's usually a sister who gave great advice." The crowd laughed. I smiled politely, even though her tone carried something sharper than humor. I'd learned long ago that Maya's jokes always had a blade hidden beneath them. But what happened next, no one could have prepared me for. Maya turned toward David. Her voice softened, almost trembling. "David, do you remember what I told you that night before the wedding?" He looked confused, then glanced at me as if searching for permission to respond. Before he could speak, she crossed the stage in 3 confident steps, and then, in front of every guest, she took his face in her hands and kissed him. Not a sisterly kiss, not an accident. A deep, claiming kiss, the kind that silenced the music, the laughter, the breathing of 150 people. When she finally pulled away, she turned toward the crowd and shouted with a laugh that echoed through the hall. "He was never yours, Laura. He was mine before you stole him." The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, some laughter from people too stunned to know what else to do. The band stopped playing mid-note. The photographer froze, camera halfway to his face. I could even hear the sound of someone dropping a glass, the sharp shatter slicing through the silence that followed. And I just stood there. I didn't move. I didn't cry. It felt as if the entire world had gone underwater. Voices muffled, movement slow. I saw faces turning toward me, pity in some, curiosity in others. My own husband, the man I had trusted for 10 years, looked pale, frozen, his mouth opening but no words coming out. Maya stood triumphant, breathing fast, her lipstick smeared, her eyes wild. The air smelled of champagne, sweat, and betrayal. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another murmured, "This can't be real." But it was real. Every humiliating second of it. My heart didn't break in that moment. It hardened. I reached for my glass of water, lifted it calmly, and took a sip. My hand didn't tremble. If Maya expected tears, she didn't get them. If David expected me to collapse, he was about to be disappointed. I set the glass back on the table and adjusted the sleeve of my gown. My voice was quiet, almost detached when I finally spoke. "You're right, Maya. I suppose I never really knew what was mine." The whispers grew louder behind me, but I didn't look at anyone. I turned, walked past the stunned guests, and headed toward the exit. Each step echoed against the marble floor, steady, measured, deliberate. I could feel 100 eyes following me, but I didn't care. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors, stepped into the cool night air, and inhaled deeply. Outside, the city lights flickered in the distance. I could still hear faint laughter from inside. Awkward, uncomfortable laughter that tried to patch over the wreckage Maya had created. I took out my phone. My fingers didn't shake as I scrolled to one name, a name I hadn't dialed in years. It rang twice before a calm, familiar voice answered. "Laura, it's been a while." I looked back at the hall, the golden lights glowing through the windows, and said quietly, "Yes, I need your help tonight." There was a pause. Then the voice replied, I'll be there in 40 minutes. I ended the call and leaned against my car, letting the night wind cool my skin. Inside, I knew they were still talking. My sister probably playing the victim now, my husband probably whispering explanations that wouldn't matter. They thought I had walked away defeated, that I was too weak, too humiliated to fight back. But they didn't know me, not really. I wasn't running away. I was stepping out to make one call that would end their little show for good. Everyone thought I was running away. I whisper in the present tense, the memory burning behind my eyes. They had no idea I was preparing the end of their show. People often ask when I first noticed something was wrong. But betrayal doesn't happen all at once. It begins quietly, disguised as affection. It starts with the people you trust the most telling you that everything is fine, even when your heart whispers that it isn't. My sister Maya and I were born 3 years apart, but we couldn't have been more different. I was the quiet one, the family's listener, the one who remembered birthdays and cooked for holidays. I was the one who smoothed over arguments, who said, "Let's not fight," even when I was right. Maya, on the other hand, was the fire. The girl who entered every room like she owned it, the one who turned heads without trying. She was beautiful, bold, funny, the kind of woman who made life feel like a movie. Our mother used to say, "Lara brings peace, Maya brings energy. Both are blessings." But growing up with Maya, I often felt like a background character in her movie. Still, she was my sister, and I loved her. So when I met David, I introduced him to her with the same open heart I had always shown. David was kind, steady, everything Maya wasn't. He had this quiet intelligence that made me feel safe. We met at a charity event where I was volunteering, and within a year he proposed. My parents adored him instantly. Maya did too. Maybe a little too much.
I remember one evening early in our relationship. We were all having dinner at my parents' house, and Maya leaned across the table, smiling at David. "You know," she said playfully, "you look so much like that guy I dated in college, the one who couldn't stop calling me." David chuckled awkwardly, not sure how to respond. I brushed it off as another one of Maya's teasing moments. She loved attention, and she always flirted harmlessly with everyone. Or at least that's what I told myself. Later that night, as I was clearing the dishes, I asked David, half joking, "You never dated my sister, right?" He froze for a second, just one, and then smiled. "No, of course not. Don't be silly." That should have been the first red flag. But when you love someone, you don't count red flags, you fold them neatly and call them misunderstandings. When David and I got married, Maya was my maid of honor. She gave a beautiful speech that made everyone laugh and cry. "To my sister," she said, raising her glass, "and to the only man who's ever been brave enough to handle her." Everyone clapped. I remember looking at her and thinking how lucky I was to have both of them in my life, my sister and my husband, smiling at me like we were the perfect little trio. But small things started to change. Maya began visiting our home more often, always just dropping by to borrow something or to share exciting news. She'd laugh a little too loudly at David's jokes. Sometimes when I came back from the kitchen, I'd catch them talking in low voices about music, work, life. Nothing inappropriate, but something in their closeness made me uneasy. One night after dinner, as I was helping her wash dishes, I teased, "You spend more time here than at your own apartment." She smiled without looking at me. "Well, someone has to make sure your husband doesn't get bored of your quiet life." I laughed, but it didn't sound like laughter. Later that evening, I told my mother about it. She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Laura, don't start imagining things. Maya just loves company. She's your sister. She'd never cross that line." And I believed her, because that's what I did best. I believed people. Years passed. David and I built a life together. A small house, 2 dogs, a peaceful rhythm. Maya dated on and off, never serious with anyone. She always said she was too passionate to settle. Every time her relationships ended, she came to stay with us for a few days. She'd sit at our dinner table, talk about love and heartbreak, and David would comfort her like a protective brother. "You'll find the right person, Maya," he'd say. "Maybe," she'd reply, looking at him a little too long. It was subtle, quiet, like poison dissolving in water. One day, I found an old photo tucked inside one of Maya's old college books she had left at my place. It was her and David, years younger, arms around each other at a beach party. The handwriting on the back read, "To the man who made me believe in love again. M." My hand shook. I waited for David to come home and showed it to him. He stared at it for a long moment, then sighed. "Yes, we dated for a few months in college. It didn't mean anything. I should have told you, but it was ancient history, Laura." Ancient history. But that ancient history had my sister's handwriting and my husband's arm around her waist. I tried to be understanding. I told myself people make mistakes, that the past shouldn't poison the present. But something in me cracked that day. Not enough to break, just enough to let doubt seep in. After that, every laugh they shared, every touch that lingered too long, every whisper that stopped when I entered the room, it all felt heavier. Still, I did what I always did. I smiled. I hosted dinners. I said, "We're family." Because denial is easier than confrontation, when the people betraying you are the same ones you love. Looking back, I think part of me already knew. There's a silence that comes before betrayal, a calm that feels too still, too fragile. It was in our dinners, in our polite smiles, in the way David's eyes sometimes followed Maya when he thought I wasn't watching. And I chose not to see it. Because if I did, it would mean my whole life was built on a lie. So I smiled through the unease, through the jokes, through the whispers I pretended not to hear. I convinced myself everything was fine, that Maya was harmless, that David was loyal, that love was stronger than suspicion. But love doesn't protect you from truth. It only delays the impact. And when that impact finally came, in front of 150 people under the glittering lights of my anniversary night, I realized the betrayal hadn't begun that evening. It had been waiting, quietly, for years. Some storms don't arrive without warning, I whisper now, remembering the signs I ignored. I just chose to dance in the rain until it drowned me. If you've ever watched something beautiful begin to rot, you'll understand what that year felt like. It didn't fall apart overnight. The walls of my marriage didn't collapse with a bang. They crumbled quietly, one silent crack at a time. It began when Maya offered to help me plan our 10th anniversary. "You've been so busy, Laura. Let me handle the details. You deserve to just show up and enjoy." Her voice was smooth, almost sisterly. I hesitated, but she looked so sincere that I agreed. It seemed harmless. After all, who could I trust more than my own sister? Maya threw herself into the planning like it was her own wedding. She picked the venue, handled the guest list, even ordered my dress for me. She said she wanted everything to be perfect. But perfect meant hers, not mine. At every meeting, every fitting, she found a way to chip away at me, subtly, playfully, but deliberately. "You know, Laura, David's really lucky you're low maintenance. Most men his age want excitement. Maybe you should go for something sexier. You're not getting any younger, and men like to be reminded they still made the right choice. You're lucky David settled down. Men like him get bored easily." Each line was said with a smile, a laugh, and a reassuring pat on the arm, but every word left a small bruise on my confidence. I started looking at myself differently. Every wrinkle, every quiet habit, every moment of comfort began to feel like something shameful. And David, he started to change too. He became distant, distracted, always glued to his phone. He used to call me during lunch just to say hi. Now he came home late saying, "There's so much work, Laura, don't wait up." Sometimes he'd get a text and tilt the screen away. When I asked who it was, he'd say, "Just Maya, about the event." I told myself it was fine. They were planning the anniversary together after all. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Then, one evening, I was folding laundry when I noticed a faint lipstick stain on the collar of one of his shirts. Not my shade. A deep crimson, the kind Maya always wore. I froze for a moment. The air left the room. Then, like I had trained myself to do, I rationalized it. Maybe she hugged him while saying goodbye after a meeting. Maybe he brushed against someone accidentally. Maybe. That word maybe became my oxygen. That night, I ironed the shirt and put it back in his closet. If I pretended hard enough, maybe the truth would behave itself and stay hidden. A few days later, a package arrived at the house. No return address. Inside was a silver tie clip engraved with the initials D and M. I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling. When David came home, I showed it to him, trying to sound casual. "Did you order this?" He frowned, picked it up, and shrugged. "No idea. Must be a prank." He tossed it into a drawer and kissed my forehead like nothing had happened. That night, I lay awake next to him, listening to his breathing. I tried to remember the last time we had laughed together, the last time he looked at me like I was his choice, not his obligation. And the more I searched my memory, the more I realized how quiet our marriage had become. We no longer spoke about dreams or plans or anything that lived beyond routine. Just bills, chores, and empty good nights. And yet when Maya called, his tone always changed. Lighter, playful, like he was talking to someone who still made him feel alive. One Sunday morning, I came into the living room and found them sitting too close on the couch laughing at something on her phone. When they noticed me, Maya grinned. "Oh, relax, big sister. We were just picking the photo backdrop for your anniversary. You trust me, right?"
I forced a smile. Of course. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The days leading up to the celebration felt suffocating. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that my jealousy was ugly and unfair. But the more I tried to push it away, the louder that quiet voice inside me became. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen arranging flowers for the event when I overheard their voices drifting from the living room. They thought I had gone upstairs. David's voice was low, strained. "Maya, not here. She could hear us." Her reply was soft but sharp. "She won't. And besides, she'll know soon enough." I stopped breathing. The sound of my heartbeat filled my ears. David sighed. "I told you, we'll talk after the anniversary. I can't ruin it now." And then Maya's whisper, like a blade sliding out of its sheath. "You'll tell her after the anniversary. Promise me, David. Promise me." Silence. Then a sound that felt like the ground collapsing beneath my feet. His voice, quiet but certain. "I promise." I backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. The bouquet I'd been holding slipped from my hand, petals scattering across the floor like tiny pieces of something I could never put back together. I wanted to scream, to storm in and demand the truth, but I couldn't move. Instead, I walked upstairs, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't angry. Not yet. She just looked tired. Like she'd been holding up a picture-perfect life for too long, pretending not to see the cracks spreading behind the frame. Looking back, I whisper now, remembering the reflection that night. The signs weren't subtle. I was just too afraid to lose what I thought was love. Outside, the world went on. Laughter, dinner plans, text messages I'd never read. Inside, a silence began to grow between us. A silence that would soon explode under the golden lights of our anniversary night. The music was soft, the lights golden, and the air smelled of champagne and lilies. It was supposed to be our night. 10 years of love, laughter, and survival. The night I thought would heal what had quietly been breaking between us. I had convinced myself that if I smiled enough, if I pretended hard enough, the pieces of our life would click back together. Maybe tonight, under those chandeliers, David would look at me and remember why he chose me. The ballroom shimmered. Guests laughed and toasted, the sound of crystal glasses ringing like fragile promises. Everyone said the same thing. "Lara, you and David are perfect. 10 years, you're such an inspiration." If only they knew. I was wearing the dress Maya had picked, silver silk that clung too tightly, too revealing for my taste. But she had insisted, "You need to remind him what he has." I remember her smirk when I stepped out of the dressing room. Now I understood that she wasn't dressing me for admiration. She was dressing me for comparison. And then she arrived. Maya, my sister, the woman who had planned every detail of this evening. She was dressed in red. Not a deep wine or soft rose, but a blazing scarlet that demanded the room's attention. All eyes turned to her the moment she entered, her perfume heavy and sweet, the same one I used to wear before she borrowed it and never gave it back. She glided through the crowd like a queen in her court, her laughter loud, her charm magnetic. And David, my husband, couldn't stop watching her. I noticed it even as he stood beside me, his hand loosely resting on my back, as though remembering to play the part. The warmth that used to be there was gone, replaced by a nervous energy, the kind that comes from holding too many secrets in your chest. When the host called for David's speech, the crowd quieted. He looked at me, smiled, but his eyes flickered toward Maya before he began. 10 years, he said, his voice slightly trembling. 10 years with the woman who made me believe in love again. The guests sighed. Someone clapped softly. I smiled, though my chest felt heavy. "Lara, you've stood by me through everything. My failures, my temper, my long nights at work. You made our house a home. You made my life—" He paused. His eyes moved, not to me, but to the woman in red standing near the cake. Maya's lips curved upward with a slow, knowing smile. "Worth living," he finished weakly. The crowd clapped, but his words hung strangely in the air, hollow, rehearsed, unfinished. Before I could even breathe, Maya's voice cut through the applause. "Beautiful speech, David," she said, her tone dripping with something between mockery and triumph. Laughter rippled nervously through the guests. David stiffened. And then before anyone could react, she walked straight to him. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, deliberate, commanding. "But why don't you tell them the truth?" she said, her voice rising, echoing across the hall. The laughter stopped. She reached him, placed her hand on his chest, and whispered something that only he heard. His face went white. Then, in one horrifying motion, she pulled him closer and kissed him. Not a shy kiss, not confusion. Acclaim. Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped a glass. The microphone squealed as David stumbled backward, his face drained of all color. Maya turned to the crowd, her lipstick smeared, her eyes bright with victory. "He was never yours," she shouted, pointing at me. "He was mine before you stole him."
The room exploded. Shocked murmurs, nervous laughter, whispers slicing through the air like blades. People craned their necks, whispering, recording, some pretending to look away while their eyes devoured every second of it. I stood there frozen. I could hear my heartbeat louder than the music that had awkwardly resumed. My champagne glass trembled in my hand, the bubbles bursting silently against the crystal. For a moment, I thought I'd scream, but no sound came. Just stillness. Cold, terrifying stillness. David tried to speak. Lara, But I didn't want to hear it. Because in that instant, I realized it didn't matter. Whether it was a one-time mistake or a long affair, the humiliation was the same. The betrayal was complete. The world around me blurred. Laughter, whispers, the camera flashes, the shocked faces, and then clarity. I placed my glass gently on the nearest table. I smoothed the wrinkles of my silver dress, and without a word, I walked out. No tears, no screaming, just the quiet click of my heels against marble and the weight of 200 eyes watching me go. Behind me, Maya's voice called out, mockingly, "Oh, come on, Lara, don't be so dramatic. You always did love an exit." Laughter followed. But it didn't touch me anymore. Outside, the night was cool and silent, a cruel contrast to the chaos inside. I stepped into the courtyard, where the music faded into a distant hum. The city lights shimmered against the black sky, and for the first time that evening, I could breathe. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I stared at it, my reflection staring back from the dark screen. A woman I barely recognized. Then slowly, I unlocked it and dialed a single number. It rang once, twice. A familiar voice answered, "Lara, are you okay?" I looked back at the glowing ballroom windows, laughter still spilling out like poison. "No," I said quietly, "but I will be." The voice on the other end waited. I inhaled deeply, steadying my tone. "I need your help. Tonight." When I ended the call, the silence around me felt like the calm before a storm. The kind of silence that belongs not to defeat, but to decision. I didn't know if I wanted revenge or peace, but I knew I couldn't have both. I whispered to myself as I turned away from the hall. 40 minutes had passed since I walked out of that hall. 40 minutes that felt like a lifetime. Inside, the music had resumed. I could still hear faint echoes of laughter when the doors opened for arriving guests who didn't yet know what kind of night they had stepped into. Outside, I stood near the entrance, hidden behind a column, watching the golden light spill from the ballroom like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something irreversible. My hands were steady now. My pulse, calm. The humiliation had burned through me, leaving behind something colder. Clarity.
Then I heard it. The low growl of an engine breaking the stillness. A black Mercedes glided up to the entrance, its headlights slicing through the night. It stopped with deliberate grace, like it belonged to someone who never rushed for anything or anyone. The driver stepped out first, a tall man in a dark suit. He walked around and opened the rear door. And out she came, Evelyn Carter. Even before she spoke, the air around her shifted. Tall, poised, in a midnight blue coat that shimmered faintly under the lights, she looked like power wrapped in elegance. Every step she took toward the hall was measured, purposeful. Evelyn Carter. The woman who had taught me what dignity looked like when the world tried to strip it away. My former boss, mentor, and friend. The CEO of the very company where David had begged for a chance 5 years ago. Few knew that David's career, his sudden success, the money that funded our perfect lifestyle, had Evelyn's fingerprints all over it. She had believed in him when no one else did. She had given him a position in a special investment project, one he told me was nothing important. But it was important. Very important. And now, she was here, because I had made that one call.
Inside the hall, laughter still echoed. Maya was in the center of attention, basking in the gossip she had created, the queen of chaos in her red dress. David stood nearby, pale and stiff, surrounded by whispers that cut sharper than glass. The double doors opened with a quiet thud. Heads turned, and the room fell silent. Evelyn didn't need to announce herself. Her presence did that for her. She walked straight down the aisle between tables, her heels clicking with authority that silenced even the boldest whisperers. David froze. His drink slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The color drained from his face as if the ghosts of every secret he had buried had walked in with her. Evelyn, he stammered, forcing a weak smile. What are you— Finish that sentence carefully, David, because every word you say tonight will be remembered. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, Isn't that the CEO of Carter Investments? Another murmured, She's the one funding his projects, right? Evelyn turned slowly toward the crowd, her posture regal, her expression unreadable. I apologize for the interruption, she said, her tone polished, almost cordial. But since this celebration concerns one of my employees, and apparently one of my former protégés, I felt it necessary to clarify a few things. Her words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. David tried to step forward, sweat beading at his temples. Evelyn, please, not here. Oh, especially here. She cut in sharply. Public humiliation deserves public truth, don't you think? The audience murmured again. Maya's smirk faltered for the first time. Evelyn turned toward her with a look that could freeze fire. And you must be Maya, she said smoothly. The sister, correct? I've heard a lot about you. Maya blinked, her confidence flickering. Well, yes, I've heard you've been very involved. Quite the helping hand in David's extracurricular activities. Her voice laced the word activities with enough venom to make even the boldest guests glance away. David's jaw tightened. That's enough. No, David, what's enough is the theft of $180,000 in company funds disguised as marketing expenses, all transferred to shell accounts Maya conveniently managed. The room erupted. Maya's face drained of color. What? That's a lie. I didn't— Save it, Evelyn said, holding up a folder. We have emails, bank transfers, and the hotel invoices your little business meetings were charged under. It's all quite, explicit. Laughter turned to gasps. Phones started recording. The same people who'd laughed at my humiliation were now witnessing something else. Justice. Live. David's voice cracked. You can't prove— David, Evelyn said sharply, cutting through his protest. You signed every authorization, and I have the board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning to finalize your termination. The crowd was stunned into silence. Some guests looked at me, others at David, unsure whose side they were even supposed to be on anymore. Evelyn's eyes softened slightly as she turned toward me. I wasn't sure I'd come tonight, Lara, she said quietly, her tone shifting from authority to respect. But when you called, I remembered what you once told me, that silence sometimes protects the wrong people. My throat tightened. I said nothing. She turned back to the room. Let's be clear about one thing, she declared, her voice carrying effortlessly across the hall. The only woman David owed loyalty to tonight was his wife and his employer. He betrayed both. A ripple of shocked murmurs spread through the guests. The same people who had once pitied me now looked at me differently, not as the broken wife, but the woman standing tall in the wreckage with quiet dignity. Maya stumbled backward, eyes wild. You can't do this. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. You're right, I can't. But the police can. They're on their way. The double doors opened again. This time, 2 security officers entered, followed by a man in a dark blazer flashing a badge.
The room collectively inhaled. "Mrs. Carter, we've received your report." "Thank you, officer," Evelyn replied smoothly. "These two individuals will need to come with you for questioning." The sound of chairs scraping echoed as everyone watched. Maya began to sob, her mascara running down her cheeks, the perfect image of a woman whose spotlight had just turned into interrogation lighting. David looked at me one last time, eyes full of desperation, disbelief, and maybe finally regret. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I had cried enough for him. As the officers escorted them out, Evelyn leaned close to me and whispered, "This is your moment, Laura. Don't ever apologize for standing in your own power." Then she straightened and left with her usual grace, no dramatics, no lingering looks, just calm control. The room stayed silent even after the doors shut behind them. People stared at me. The woman they had just watched be humiliated, now standing untouched, composed, and unbroken. Someone in the crowd began to clap, softly at first, then louder, until the hall filled with the sound of applause. It wasn't celebration. It was respect. I stood still for a moment, letting the sound wash over me, then lifted my chin and exhaled slowly. For the first time that night, I felt taller than I ever had in my life, because I realized revenge doesn't always need blood or tears. Sometimes silence and dignity do the work. "I didn't need to scream or slap," I said quietly, more to myself than to anyone else. The truth screamed louder than any of them ever could. Morning came quietly, as if the world itself was embarrassed by what it had witnessed. For the first time in weeks, the sunlight didn't hurt my eyes. It spilled through my curtains, golden and soft, the color of peace, not performance. The headlines arrived before breakfast. CEO's protege arrested for corporate fraud. Gala gone wrong, family scandal erupts at 10th anniversary party. Sister's betrayal caught on camera, viral sensation. They called it the kiss that killed a marriage. 100,000 people had seen the video within 24 hours. The clip of Maya grabbing David and declaring he was never yours had been looped, slowed, dissected. The follow-up footage of Evelyn's entrance turned the story into something cinematic, almost unbelievable. People love drama, but they love justice more. Comment sections overflowed with sympathy. Strangers called me the woman with grace, the wife who stood tall, the calm before the storm. I didn't comment. I didn't respond. I didn't even open the messages from relatives who suddenly wanted to check on me. I simply made tea and sat by my window, watching the city move on. Inside, I felt hollow, but not broken. The rage that had once consumed me had burned itself out, leaving something purer in its place. I realized revenge doesn't always need blood or tears. Sometimes silence and dignity do the work. 3 days later, David's arrest made the evening news. The camera showed him leaving the courthouse, flanked by officers, head down, avoiding the flash of cameras that once followed him for business interviews. Reporters shouted questions. "Did your wife know? Was your sister-in-law involved?" He said nothing. He had always been good at silence, but this time, it wasn't power. It was shame.
Maya had vanished. Some said she'd fled to another city. Others claimed she'd been questioned by police and quietly blacklisted from every event planning firm in the region. Her social media accounts disappeared one by one, as if she were erasing herself, pixel by pixel. And me? I stayed still. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting to be seen, loved, or understood. I was learning the quiet art of being at peace. The house felt lighter without their shadows. No more whispered arguments, no more pretending, no more walking on eggshells inside my own life. I began small, cleaning drawers, donating dresses that reminded me of nights I had smiled through pain, repainting the walls that once held framed lies of happiness. Each act felt like reclaiming territory that had been stolen from me, inch by inch, breath by breath. 2 weeks later, there was a knock on my door. Soft, hesitant. I almost ignored it, but something, intuition, curiosity, closure, made me open it. Maya stood there. She looked nothing like the woman in red from that night. Her hair was unkempt, her makeup smudged, her once flawless confidence replaced by something human, fear. Her voice trembled. "Lara, please, I had nowhere else to go." I didn't move, didn't speak. I just looked at her. The sister who had once shared my childhood secrets, then sold my trust for a moment of applause. "Everything's gone," she whispered. "My job, my reputation, my friends. They all saw the videos. No one will hire me. Please, I'm not asking for much. Just help me get back on my feet." Her words were rehearsed, fragile, laced with desperation but not remorse. I noticed that. I stepped aside slightly, enough for her to see the life I was rebuilding. Clean, quiet, peaceful. "You've lost so much," I said softly. "But you haven't lost everything." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "You still have the chance to learn from what you did. To change." Her shoulders slumped. "Lara, I said I'm sorry." I looked at her then, really looked at her. She wasn't sorry for the pain. She was sorry for the consequences. And for the first time, I understood the difference. "Forgiveness," I said, my voice steady, "is earned, not demanded." The silence that followed was heavy. Her lips trembled, but no words came. I could see it, the realization that her power had finally run out. She left quietly, her heels clicking down the hallway, fading like the last echo of an old life. When the door closed, I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant either. Just free. Weeks passed. The storm faded from the headlines. People moved on to newer scandals, fresher heartbreaks. But I stayed the same. Calm, grounded, alive. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. I went back to work, took long walks, started laughing without needing permission. When Evelyn visited one afternoon, she smiled as she watched me water the plants on my balcony. "You seem lighter," she said. "I am. I stopped carrying what wasn't mine." She nodded, that knowing smile of hers returning. Closure isn't about getting even. It's about getting back to yourself. Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, I stood by the same window where I had once cried, watching the city lights shimmer. But this time, they didn't look cold or distant. They looked alive. I thought about everything. The betrayal, the humiliation, the black car, the truth. Every piece had burned me, but it had also forged me. "No bitterness," I whispered to the reflection in the glass. "Only self-respect." And for the first time in a long, long while, I believed it. 6 months later, the world had changed. Or maybe I had. The headlines were gone, the whispers had died down, and life had returned to its quiet rhythm. But I was no longer the woman who once stood trembling in that ballroom, humiliated and broken. I had shed her, like a skin that no longer fit. The pain had carved space inside me, and in that space, something new had grown. I moved into a smaller apartment, overlooking a park where the light fell softly every morning. I liked watching the world wake up. People walking dogs, children running to school, strangers sharing smiles. For years, I had lived in rooms filled with noise and pretense. Now, silence had become my friend. I began to write, small notes at first, reflections, lessons learned. Words became my therapy. And those words slowly turned into something more. One afternoon, Evelyn came by for tea. She looked around at the calm simplicity of my new life and smiled. "You've rebuilt beautifully," she said. I laughed quietly. "I didn't rebuild the same house, Evelyn. I built a new one." She tilted her head. "And what will you do now, Laura?" I didn't have an answer then. But that night, as I read a message from a stranger who had seen my story online, a woman who wrote, "You gave me courage to leave someone who hurt me," I realized what I was meant to do. The next morning, I registered a small support circle, the Phoenix Room, a counseling group for women who had been betrayed, not just by lovers, but by family, friends, anyone they once trusted completely. At our first session, there were only 3 women. By the end of the month, there were 20. We didn't just talk about pain. We talked about rediscovering ourselves, the versions of us that had been silenced by fear or loyalty or shame. I remember sitting with them, listening to stories of mothers, sisters, and partners who had broken trust, and realizing that betrayal wasn't an ending, it was an awakening. So one evening, I wrote a letter, not to anyone else, but to myself, and those words became the heart of my new beginning. Dear Laura, you once thought betrayal destroyed you, but it didn't. It revealed you, your strength, your boundaries, your voice. You found out that pain doesn't mean weakness, and endings aren't failures. Sometimes losing everything false is the only way to find what's real. And forgiveness? It isn't about letting them back in. It's about letting yourself walk out, lighter, freer, untied. Keep choosing peace. Keep choosing dignity. Because you are no longer surviving. You are becoming. Maya's name still surfaced sometimes, in gossip, in half-remembered rumors. Someone told me she had left the country, trying to start over under a different name. David's trial dragged on, each new headline painting him a little smaller than before. But I didn't hate them anymore. Hate is heavy, and I had carried enough weight. They had become lessons, warnings in the chapters of other people's lives, and I had become something stronger than they ever imagined I could be. Free. Now, on quiet evenings, I sit by the window of my new office, our group space, filled with soft light and the sound of healing conversations. I often stay until sunset, watching the sky turn gold, then crimson, then blue. It reminds me of that night, the red of Maya's dress, the gold of the ballroom lights, the black of Evelyn's car. Colors of pain once. Now, colors of rebirth. My voice, once broken, now feels steady, calm but sure. They took my trust, but not my strength. And that's something no one can ever steal again. The day fades. The lights come on. And for the first time, I feel not just alive, but whole. You've just heard my story, a story of love, betrayal, and rebirth. But maybe it's not just mine. Maybe you've felt the sting of trust broken by someone you thought would never hurt you. Maybe you've stood in silence when the world laughed, wondering if you'd ever stand tall again. If you have, I want you to remember this. You will rise. Not by shouting, not by seeking revenge, but by walking away with dignity so quiet it echoes louder than their cruelty ever could. Because sometimes silence is the loudest